Since we realize that our identity is not dependent upon form, therefore, of course, we do not fear changing it, knowing that we can adopt any form we desire. We do not know death in your terms. Our existence takes us into many other environments, and we blend into these. We follow what rules of form exist within these environments. All of us here are teachers, and we therefore adapt our methods also, so that they will make sense to personalities with varying ideas of reality. Consciousness is not dependent upon form, as I have said, and yet it always seeks to create form. We do not exist in any time framework as you know it. Minutes, hours, or years have lost both their meaning and their fascination. We are quite aware of the time situations within other systems, however, and we must take them into account in our communications. Otherwise, what we say would not be understood. There are no real barriers to separate the systems of which I speak. The only separation is brought about by the varying abilities of personalities to perceive and manipulate. You exist in the midst of many other systems of reality, for example, but you do not perceive them. And even when some event intrudes from these systems into your own three-dimensional existence, you are not able to interpret it, for it is distorted by the very fact of entry. I told you that we do not experience your time sequence. We travel through various intensities. Our work, development, and experience all takes place within what I term the moment point. Here, within the moment point, the smallest thought is brought to fruition, the slightest possibility explored, the probability thoroughly examined, the least of the most forceful feeling entertained. It is difficult to explain this clearly, and yet the moment point is the framework within which we have our psychological experience. Within it, simultaneous actions follow freely through associative patterns. For example, pretend that I think of you, Joseph. In so doing, I immediately experience, and fully, your past, present, and future in your terms, and all of those strong or determining emotions and motivations that have ruled you. I can travel through those experiences with you if I choose. We can follow a consciousness through all of its forms, for example, and in your terms, within the flicker of an eye. Now it takes study, development, and experience before our identity can learn to hold its own stability in the face of such constant stimuli. And many of us have gotten lost, even forgetting who we were until we once more awaken to ourselves. Much of this is quite automatic to us now. In the infinite varieties of consciousness, we are still aware of a small percentage of the entire banks of personalities that exist. For our vacations, we visit amid quite simple life forms and blend with them. To this extent, we indulge in relaxation and sleep, for we can spend a century as a tree or as an uncomplicated life form in another reality. We delight our consciousness with the enjoyment of simple existence. We may create, you see, the forest in which we grow. Usually, however, we are highly active. Our full energies focus in our work and in new challenges. We can form for ourselves, from our own psychological entities, other personalities whenever we wish. These, however, must then develop according to their own merit, using the creative abilities inherent in them. They are free to go their own way. We do not do this lightly, however. Each reader is a portion of his or her own entity, and is developing toward the same kind of existence that I know. In childhood and in the dream state, each personality is aware to some extent of the true freedom that belongs to its own inner consciousness. These abilities of which I speak, therefore, are inherent characteristics of consciousness as a whole and of each personality. My environment, as I told you, changes constantly, but then so does your own. You rationalize away quite legitimate intuitive perception at such times. For example, if a room suddenly appears small and cramped to you, you take it for granted that this change of dimension is imaginative, and that the room has not changed regardless of your feelings. The fact is that the room under such conditions will have changed quite definitely, and in very major respects, even though the physical dimensions will still measure the same. The entire psychological impact of the room will have altered. Its effect will be felt by others beside yourself. It will attract certain kinds of events rather than others, and it will alter your own psychological structure and hormonal output. You will react to the altered state of the room even in quite physical ways, though its width or length in inches or feet may not seem to vary. I told our good friend Joseph to underline the word seem because your instruments would show no physical alteration, since the instruments within such a room would themselves have already altered to the same degree. You are constantly changing the form, the shape, the contour, and the meaning of your physical body and most intimate environment, although you do your best to ignore these constant alterations. On the other hand, we allow them full rein, knowing that we are motivated by an inner stability that can well afford spontaneity and creation, and realizing that spiritual and psychological identity are dependent upon creative change. Our environment, therefore, is composed of exquisite imbalances, where change is allowed full play. Your own time structure misleads you into your ideas of the relative permanency of physical matter, and you close your eyes to the constant alterations within it. Your physical senses confine you as best they can to the perception of a highly formalized reality. Only through the use of the intuitions and in sleep and dream states as a rule can you perceive the joyfully changing nature of your own and any consciousness. One of my duties is to enlighten you on such matters. We must use concepts that are at least fairly familiar to you. In doing so, we therefore use portions of our own personalities with whom you can, to some extent, relate. There is no end to our environment. In your terms, there would be no lack of space or time in which to operate. Now, this would put tremendous pressure on any consciousness without proper background and development. We do not have one simple cozy universe in which to hide. We are still alert to other quite alien systems of reality that flash on the very outskirts of consciousness as we know it. There are far more various kinds of consciousness than there are physical forms, each with its own patterns of perception, dealing with its own camouflage system. Yet all of these have inner knowledge of the reality that exists within all camouflage and that composes any reality by whatever name it is called. Now, many of these freedoms are quite natural to you in the dream state, and you form dream environments often to exercise such potentials. Later, I will have at least some remarks to make concerning the ways that you can learn to recognize your own faiths, to compare them with your proficiency in daily physical life. You can learn to change your physical environment, therefore, by learning to change and manipulate your dream environment. You can also suggest specific dreams in which a desired change is seen, and under certain conditions, these will then appear in your physical reality. Now, often you do this without realizing it. Whole consciousness adopts various forms. It need not always be within a form. All forms are not physical ones. Some personalities, therefore, have never been physical. They have evolved along different lines, and their psychological structures would be alien to your own. To some extent, I also travel through such environments. Consciousness must show itself, however. It cannot unbe. It is not physical. It must therefore show its activation in other ways. In some systems, for example, it forms a highly integrated mathematical and musical patterns that are themselves stimuli for other universal systems. I am not very well acquainted with these, however, and cannot speak of them with any great familiarity. If my environment is not a permanently structured one, then, as I have told you, neither is your own. If I am aware of communicating now through Rupert, in different ways each of you telepathically communicates to and through other personalities, though with little knowledge of your accomplishment.